time!
For as long as the nation of the United States has existed, and even before then, a single truth has been at our core. Violence. The violence of early settlers who removed indigenous populations from their land. The violence of revolutionaries who took independence from the English. The violence of the unheard, rioting in the streets for their God-given rights that just so happen to be withheld from the undesirable members of the population. The violence against regimes of Japan and Germany, we denounced only to follow in their footsteps. The violence of the American people, yelling out in the name of justice against a system that seems hell-bent on keeping power away from the democracy that they tell us to protect. Violence, good violence, bad violence. All violence is core to most of humanity's history, but especially so in the history of America, where we have used so many variants of violence to bring good as often as we have done so to spread fear and chaos. In the same vein of the violence that murdered and disenfranchised minority groups by the thousands in order to protect the elite classes, punkish, rebellious violence is a core pillar, if not duty, of the American people, watering the tree of liberty, and so on. With that in mind, let me introduce you to one of, if not my favorite musical album. Welcome all you beautiful ladies and animals. Today, I'm going to be trudging through and breaking down Fight with Tools, the debut album of the Flobots. While it's got a lot more going on, Fight with Tools reflects those same traditions of violence, but modernized in an age where information, propaganda, and public outcry and protests are more powerful than lining up bodies in the town square. Fight with Tools is an album that's not just punk rock or conscious rap, but a call to action for the American people. A message first made in 2007 that, for better or worse, remains just as strong 18 years later, probably a lot more for the worse. The album is old enough to vote, which it probably wouldn't want to do anyway. First, talking about the album musically, it's an interesting sound that I find rare anywhere else. It can swing wildly from more rap and hip-hop to punk rock to folk blues, and even jazz at some times, using brass and strings in a way that really accentuates the regular guitars and drums you'd expect on a punk-adjacent album, and even some orchestral motifs that feel explicitly reminiscent of old Americana music. Ballads of the Minutemen, the kind of music you think about when watching a documentary on the Civil War or Washington crossing the Delaware. Very much done on purpose, as the whole album is a dig at the American institutions and the blatant hypocrisy at what the US claims its values are, versus what those values are when they're expressed out loud. Challenging expectations and twisting narratives in a day and age dominated by information at everyone's fingertips. Now personally, that's a clear line that I attach to right away. Most of the music I listen to is punk in some way, whether it's more folk along the lines of Jesse Wells, or the classic Johnny Cash, more rock and funk like Rage Against the Machine and the work of Zachary de la Rocha, or just the Pirates of the Caribbean soundtrack. All the music I listen to is inherently wrapped in this world of politics. Okay, maybe not that last one. So obviously, Fight with Tools, not just sounding great and being well put together, was an album that caught my attention very quickly. Like many people who first heard the Flobots, my first song of theirs was Handlebars. Even if you're unfamiliar, I'm sure you've heard this song a handful of times.
I can ride my bike with no handlebars, no handlebars, no handlebars.
And while it's good, the whole album matches the themes and vibes of Handlebars very well. The flow of Brer Rabbit and Johnny Five, the two main voices you'll hear on the album, are just so silky. They're able to stand on a soapbox without just sounding preachy. The album feels authentic and honest the whole way through, and it's just a fantastic, if not melancholy, listen, clocking in at just under an hour with 12 tracks, and a 13th bonus released on the UK version. That 13th bonus we won't be getting into today, but I just thought I'd mention it. Fight with Tools very much feels its day and age. Concerns about media tampering with the truth, the obsession of Americans and consumerism, perfectionism growing non-stop. wars in the Middle East, and the evolving dissatisfaction with our involvements a world away, the grief and anger of 9/11 worn off on a pessimistic American public unaware of an economic collapse just around the corner. It turns out the very same things are on the minds of the American public 18 years later. But with all of that on your mind, I don't really intend to get into the group themselves. I love the Flobots, I love this album and the one right after, Survival Story, with its further focus on climate concerns, but I care a lot more about the content and the words in this album than the artists behind it. Maybe that's reductive, but this script already got very long, and I need to cut space where I can. From here on out, we're gonna run down the track list, talk about all 12 songs, and break them down one by one. So without further ado, let's get into it.
There is a war going on for your mind. We are the insurgents.
The whole premise of the album begins on the idea that the Flobots have infiltrated and hijacked a state-led radio station, a dystopian world that is also just our own. A lot of the core messages are here in this first track. There's a war going on for your mind. Propaganda, advertisements of pornography in movies, and how the elites, wealthy members of our society construct social cues that force people to follow behavioral cues that keep them from breaking out of mundanity, making people scared to step out of line, to oust themselves as other or weird, to see traitors disguised under patriotism, or the ultra-wealthy controlling your world from behind a curtain. Using religion and culture wars to distract from real issues that are going on in the world, because an advisable and subdued public is a declawed public, unable to break free from the looping system that's been built for them. This is broken up by the Flobots hijacking the radio station, insurgents promising to deprogram the listeners and help them open up their mind to the very things that are being obscured from them. Now, not only is this just true with malicious actors every day focusing on really minute details and making a mountain out of a molehill, but it's a practice that has been effective for decades now and continues to be effective to this day. Whether it's a pride parade, trans rights, climate change, or the casting in a Marvel movie, things that don't really matter or should have clear-cut answers on where people should stand with them, things that don't affect 90% of people, but are used to rile them up and get them to fight one another, in order for insiders to pull away from the effects of consciousness, because active understanding of the issue is what leads to action, and nobody in power would ever want that. So it's easier to obfuscate the truth by peddling meaningless bullshit, and there's gotta be someone who can cut through it so that the American people can stick to their duty of standing up against elites and tyrants who gauge a system to be working against the people, to stand in the face of lies and peel the curtain back, rather than getting lost on what the curtain was pointing you towards, a simple yet poignant introduction for the rest of the album, less of an actual song and more of a tone setter for what's to come. Simple spoken programming with those strings, as mentioned before, invoking that feeling of decaying Americana. And with that, let's see what comes next. The second track and first proper song is Mayday, and obviously it's also a signal that there's problems going on. America is under duress, in dire need of help, but it's also a signal to Mayday, May 1st, a day in which solidarity among American workers is recognized, based on an inciting incident in Cleveland, 1919, when mayoral candidate Charles Ruthenberg organized his caucus of laborers, socialists, and communists for a demonstrative march throughout the city. During said march, the crowd were confronted by quote-unquote patriots and an army lieutenant who demanded the demonstrators fold up and put away their red flags. When declining, the streets of Cleveland broke out into a brawl, with more than 20 people being taken away by ambulances. This was a part of a wider Red Scare panic, where laborers, socialists, and anyone waving a red flag were seen as enemies of the state. Americans using their freedom of speech to march and vouch for what they believe is best, peacefully, being instigated into violence by law enforcement. Now, a century later, and again we see just exactly how the album sets us up to prepare for the same cycles of violence perpetuated between systems and those living within it. Mayday also references the sister riots of Seattle that broke out in solidarity when LA broke out in fighting after the beating of Rodney King. The song is telling us explicitly to break free from these systems of violence and build a new one. That when things get hard is not a time to lay down, but instead to bite back. Like in this lyric during the second verse. Let 'em put up obstacles and prove that it isn't possible. Fuck that, we don't give 'em any weight. True liberty and freedom's at stake. Peace will never become passé. Live my life until my last day. The narrator refuses to be buried beneath obstacles. Liberty is at stake and surrender isn't an option. You live here. They need to step in between these systems that think they can get away with injustices just because they're a part of the very establishment they want us to be comfortable around. As we also see during the chorus, signs of the next movement outside of the law, hands that trace instructions for descendants in the shadows on the run. Creating a knowledge base that transcends the generations, refuge from the crowd, the mass swaths of the public who are still being programmed, being told how and where to act. But the album knows that we've seen all the same failures in inaction time and time again. From the original May Day Massacre in 1886, the May Day Riots of 1919 to the May Day Riots of 1984, and others like the Rodney King Riots, the BLM riots, or the LA riots, we see a lot of the same thing over and over again. Speaking of, let's talk about the next track.
Same thing.
US is not us, and us is not we.
History is condemned to repeat itself. This is common knowledge, at least when we remain ignorant to the past. Same thing, along with being perhaps the funkiest track on the album with a greater focus on quartet vocals and jazz in the bass and the brass, calls attention specifically to the long history of the US overthrowing elected, popular leaders and instilling their own state actors, spending billions of dollars on a military that bombs women and children while our own citizens don't even have access to health care. The song catalogs disasters of the past, but every line still scans like a news alert from today. We get specific mentions of MLK shutting down Guantanamo Bay, pulling troops out of the Middle East, more pointless wars, Hugo Chavez, Oscar Romero, Mohammad Mossadegh, among many others, figures in history that have been elected or appointed in totally legal and supported positions, but found themselves overthrown, kicked from power, or killed outright by ties back to the great US of A, for not aligning with the views of the United States' establishment base. The song doesn't just point fingers abroad, it channels American frustration with leaders who ignore public will in favor of political power plays, how a vast majority of Americans understand the might and strength of America and would rather see those resources used to bolster and aid our allies, if not our own people, rather than overthrowing valid candidates and waging wars that are politically motivated in the favor of the State Department, while in the same breath sweeping human casualties, whether foreign citizens or our own troops, under the rug. We become so inundated with this plague of information telling us what to believe, all so that someone in charge of extracting resources or value from another nation can get away with it. In the same vein of being told that Iran is weeks away from obtaining nuclear weapons, so we can justify putting our weight on their scale, regardless of the lack of evidence that there is to support it. And speaking of the state swinging one way and then public perception in the other, we have our first proper call to action in Stand Up.
Except by a child with no socks and shoes. If you got more to give, then you've got to prove.
The album so far has been a diagnosis, a dissertation, a thesis of what problems are plaguing the world we live in. The state wants to control you through rhetoric and nonsensical culture wars while feeding people baseless excuses and launching an endless series of proxy wars while overthrowing radical leaders who don't align with the capitalistic endeavors of America. After laying out the problem, war, corruption, disinformation, Stand Up becomes the moment of ignition. It asks if we know what's wrong, what are we going to do about it? Stand Up bringing back that string motif, anchoring us back into that old school American feeling of serving for and alongside our countrymen, is about, well, standing up. Not moving for pointless wars, but for starving children, helpless mothers, and bleeding systems. The injustice of cops getting away with straight murder, of insurgents giving their lives, freedom fighters still laying down what they have for the ideas that they believe in. So stand up. We shall not be moved, and we won't fight a war for fossil fuel. It's times like this that you want to plot a coup. Put your hands up, and I'll copy you. This track doesn't just remind us where the rot is, it reminds us where the real power lies. With the people. The solidarity is exactly what we need. The American people don't want endless wars over fossil fuels, but unless we all stand together in pursuit of our own lofty goals, we'll never break free either. Rather than lying down and surrendering to the programming, the insurgents are calling us to mobilize. If we've ever been lucky enough to not live in a war zone, then we carry greater responsibility to use that privilege as a fuel for change. Once mobilized and understanding of the dream in place, there's only one thing left to do. The titular track on the album is a continuation of Stand Up, coming in as we hear the insurgents take over the airways once more, stating their mission for independence more blatantly. This is probably my favorite track on the entire list. The general vibe, a rock ballad call to arms, along with the chorus, just hits in a very special way to me. This is a call for heroes to rise, and anyone listening can answer. When the system itself becomes the battlefield and our minds are under constant siege, Fight with Tools reminds us that inaction is surrender. The battlefield is everywhere. There is no sanctuary, there are no civilians. You have two choices: surrender or enlist. There's more here for you to do, not to just put up your fist and stand in performative solidarity, but to fill your fist with the tools that you need to fight, with knowledge, with information, with melted down metals, and whatever tools you can get a hold of. The name itself, Fight with Tools, means just so much. Tools are multifaceted, being both literal tools, shovels, axes, hammers, the tools of the labor force, the common man, who's exploited by the ruling class, along with metaphorical tools, information, community, solidarity, all those people standing together, not just in spirit, but shoulder to shoulder. It's a reminder to us as Americans of your duty to the nation's freedom. Man, woman, and child, this thing only works by mutual consent and respect. Those who hold the tools, the information to know better, and the literal tools they use to make money for the greedy lords are the ones who truly hold the power in this country. They just don't know it. The idea that mediated rationality that supports one another rather than tearing us down is what makes you and your countrymen special, in contrast to those hyper-wealthy that would rather distract you with culture wars and fear-mongering. The super wealthy rich capitalists that would turn on each other and you the second it was in their benefit. And when unmediated, ego gone unchecked, we get Handlebars. This is the one that everyone has probably heard. It's not hard to see why it became so popular for Flobots, with a rising score that builds and builds from a small-scale beat into a full-on explosive track, with guitar, trumpets, and more dominating the soundscape. The music escalating alongside the rising tensions within the song itself. We see a very blatant read of independence and the way it can be exploited by different people in different stages of life, from kids riding their bikes without using their hands, to taking apart controllers and writing a comic book, all the way up to driven engineers who develop supercomputers and record-setting engines, in bringing us finally to those in unchecked power, ego gone loose, and driving us to the end of the world. People with such power can do whatever they want, at least as far as they believe. Drive creates innovation, but it also creates tyrants. The same force that builds supercomputers can launch nukes. It's about how blind pride and ego can be. It's one thing to be proud of your accomplishments, it's another thing to call yourself the most pure good guy in one breath and claiming you could kill the world for the hell of it in the other. They're just not two statements that can coincide, and the nature of the song is right to reflect that. As the music turns up, the track becomes more chaotic, and the unchecked power of our narrator grows and grows. The child who once rode a bike with no hands is now announcing nuclear launches. The music swells, chaotic, triumphant, terrifying, power without a restraint, confidence without a conscience. It's no longer a game. What begins as innocent showing off becomes a darker display of unchecked power, that ego so easily tainted. How easily it can be tainted. It's no coincidence this is one of the two songs that got an official music video, visually driving home the descent from invention to destruction, showing us two characters with similar lives, just going down vividly different paths that sway dramatically in moral clarity. The dichotomy of throwing your hands up with other people across the world being bombed. The tragedy in our own human experience where, in Johnny Five's own words, "It's tragic to me that the appetite for military innovation is endless, but when it comes to taking on a project like ending world hunger, it's seen as outlandish. It's not treated with the same seriousness." Never Had It challenges a deeper, more personal resistance. What happens when change is possible, but terrifying? When the cost of stepping forward is the comfort you already have. The seventh track on the album presses the issue of the internal problem, one facing positive change and being unable to accept it. Because the path to get there might be uncomfortable or be too drastic of a change from your current existence that you end up in action paralysis. Of course, this aptly ties into the album's themes of standing up against injustice and taking action as a collective. It rests on those who are comfortable enough, fat and happy, or too stressed in their world to imagine it any other way. Changing the status quo could be amazing. It could also destroy everything you have. It's a reflection on personal weakness that keeps us from vocalizing the very things that could improve our lives, but also recognizing that our struggles are not isolated. They are shared by you and everyone around you. It helps that this track is the most sentimental, carried by soft drums and a quiet horn, over the mostly sung lyrics rather than the rap verses you find all over the rest of the album. It reflects that kind of interpersonal drama that sits at the center of this listing. But it's a solemn reminder that all the tools remain in your hands. It's just up to you to take charge of what you do with them. Combat is the track with the least to literally say. Most of it is made of the same phrase, the line, "No known beat can keep me lonely." It's a declaration that rhythm and music connect us. In a world trying to isolate and pacify you, a beat becomes both resistance and refuge. With two short verses which come after, and that's it. It's the second funkiest song, and while it's not literally saying a lot, it does reflect the title of the song itself. Combat, lyrical combat, another tool of the revolution, the war for your mind. Song, music, combat isn't here to explain. It's here to stick, to dig into your brain, repeat itself, and stay. That's its purpose. Weaponized repetition, a mantra for resistance, a groove that refuses to let go, an earworm that buries into your brain and keeps you engaged. Also matched by the energy of the song, which is a lot louder, punchier, and on the verge of screaming, by Johnny Five, who leads the vocals. Short and simple, Combat is one of the catchier songs on the list, but isn't doing as much narratively. So with that, let's move forward. The rhythm method, or move, is a track with a few different meanings right from the name alone. Rhythm method is an idea around family planning, tracking the rhythms of ovulation cycles so that women may know when to avoid or plan to have children. A metaphorical declaration that the Flobots are trying at just the right time to birth their movement. On a second layer, the song is describing a simple dance. We see it in the lyrics. Throw your body on the dance floor, whether you're a beginner or advanced, or whatever you're doing, it's okay, like this, so everyone do it your own way, like this. They're encouraging everyone to dance along to their beat, their movement. Whether you're new or old or experienced or bad at it, it doesn't matter how you come to the movement, all that matters is that you're standing in solidarity with the rest of your fellow dancers. Like how combat looked at music as tools of revolution, the rhythm movement is using that same music and flow to birth the revolution and its supporters. Lastly, the song is also literally unique in its rhythm. Flobots play this in a 7/8 time signature, somewhat rare for music in general, let alone a pop song. The unusual rhythm mirrors the message. Resistance doesn't have to follow expected rules. It gives the track a distinct feel, unsteady, unpredictable, but still inviting. Because really any rhythm you find yourself in, it all seems to mix into the flow. A lot of the lyrics build into these ideas, comparing themselves and their rhythm to Method Man, drawing lines towards Superman with their persistent message and giving it to you raw. The idea that the Flobots are the ones to metaphorically impregnate the revolution in their listeners. We see it in the last verse. Whatever you're doing, it's okay, like this, so everyone do it your own way, like this. Give it to you unprotected, because the rhythm is the method. The idea of encouraging participants comes back because, as they say, the rhythm is the method. It's the tools of revolution we need, so just move, unfiltered, unpolished, unprotected, because it's that rhythm, that willingness to act imperfectly, that gives the movement life. Unprotected also dares to reject safety and conformity, a swipe at the idea that revolutions need to be neat or sanctioned. The Flobots are saying, let it out raw, let it be messy, the method is the rhythm, and the rhythm doesn't ask for permission. Like they already told us, we need to fight with tools, literal tools, metaphorical, action is necessary, and inaction, or the declawing of action, is going to just hurt the movement. We hear them talk about literal violence. This rhythm section will rattle the stands, rip sheets like we battled the Klan. And sometimes action means confrontation, not just ideological, but material. Not just rhythm, but force. Flobots talk about literal violence against the Klan, because sometimes words and music work, but revolution also needs focused action against those that are outwardly evil to be effective. You can't lay down and let movements of hate walk all over you. They need to be challenged intellectually and physically so they can't grow to oppress others.
She faced this every day. People she saw on a regular basis. People she loved in several cases. People she knew were incredibly racist.
The 9th song of the album is named after an activist and journalist, Braden, who was known for speaking out and calling for change in her home of Kentucky and Alabama, even in the face of overwhelming racism that gripped the South in the late 40s. It speaks to the messages of Martin Luther King Jr., his mention of another America, where one half of Americans experienced joys and pleasantries, the other sat in disgrace and were abandoned as people within the nation that they lived. Anne herself was an early acknowledgement of this other America, often fighting on behalf of those less fortunate around her. The track tells a story that reflects Anne Braden's life directly, without naming her in the verses, but beginning and ending in her own voice. It details the thoughts of a woman, taught about equality in church, but shown racism by her own mother. It asks us about the people in the South, in the political and racial climate of pre-social change America, who saw the intense segregation and blatant racism of white women who were used as an excuse to hang black men, of how someone could understand just how evil and wrong that all is, but remain quiet out of fear when everyone around them seems to buy into it. Not excusing this inaction, but putting that action paralysis into perspective with a very real example from our past, platforming and Braden as an example of somebody who broke the mold regardless, who stood up even in the face of that inequality, without worrying about the repercussions she'd face for speaking out, showing us what it looks like when you stand up together rather than letting things continue just because. How would you cope facing the fact the flesh on their hands was tainted with sin? She faced this every day. People she saw on a regular basis, people she loved in several cases, people she knew were incredibly racist. It was painful, but she never stopped loving them, never stopped calling their names, and she never stopped being a Southern woman, and she never stopped fighting for change. This is a song for the doubtful, for those who heard the messages and still sit on the edge. If you're asking, what if all your family would hate you, if you came to believe and understand that people who you knew and loved were evil in their beliefs, that it's still strong and worthwhile to stand up for that injustice regardless. A proof about the strengths in activism rather than continuing to be feeble in the face of backlash. Then finally, ending on the succinct and perfect words of Anne Braden, quoting a letter by William L. Patterson, telling us and everyone else that you don't have to be afraid to join the other America, to stand by them.
There is another America.
Anne's words are a reminder, especially not now, when lawmakers are casually embracing racism and launch attacks on queer and immigrant communities. The song is a hand extended to the doubtful, proof that change doesn't need permission, just courage. We Are Winning captures the positive change made through peace, understanding, and activism. Most of the song is a recap of the themes and events throughout the album, with an older woman reading off reports that indicate their success, from gang members participating in after-school organizations, a porn star creating wholesome art of senior citizens, and a patriot ashamed of their home. But they can't leave. They aren't a patriot because of blind nationalism, but because they think and see the issues, so they rise up to challenge them rather than flee. And that notion of patriotism is my favorite part of the album's message. You're not a patriot by blindly marching behind a flag, but by looking at the nation and demanding it be better. Not to settle for what works because you and your class may be getting by, but asking for more because we are not the best until everyone is taken care of. The rest of the song describes this battlefield of your mind. Agents activating like landmines, guerrilla peacemakers that you can't get rid of, because as long as you are thinking, you are winning. We are winning. Defeat is impossible because when organized and unified, nothing, no tyrant, no paper, no force could stand against the will of the people. Revolution, when properly breathing, moving, and thinking, is a force of nature that shakes the disinformation of television networks and false divides created by the elite. It asks you to stand up, because as long as we take action, nothing can stop us. There's no need to be armed because thought is our weapon. There are no civilians because the war for our minds attacks each and every one of us. The only way to resist and protect your loved ones is to stand with them with understanding and open arms. That in the face of endless corruption, corporations poisoning our air and water, holding up against that is what we need to draw a new world for peace and prosperity, and as long as it's kept alive in the minds of the people, it can never be washed away. We hear that final call to action. We are building up a new world. Do not sit idly by. Do not remain neutral. Do not rely on this broadcast alone. We are only as strong as our signal. This is where the truth of the album lands hardest. Don't wait for someone else to carry the message. Don't assume art will save us. A song can inspire, but it can't march for you. It can rally, but it can't rebuild. The only way to win is if you rise. In the face of ecological collapse, endless war, and media misinformation, we rise. Because as long as the dream survives in our minds, it cannot be buried. The movement cannot be erased, and the rhythm will carry us forward.
Rise together, we rise, together we rise, together we rise, together we rise.
The second single after Handlebars, added onto the album as a bonus track, Rise is a simple but effective echo on the album's messages about throwing away stereotypes in favor for unity, community, and redemption. Rise asks us to throw away what we believe, that we're all special regardless of what you're told to believe about people. They tell us, the answer's obvious, we switch the consonants and change the sword to words and lift continents. A clear and obvious line asking us to throw away senseless violence in exchange for words, for peace, for diplomacy. Of course, we still need to stand together and we'll even need to fight for equality, but the mindless, pointless, culture war-driven divides that separate us and make us feel like we're not on the same team is just wrong. Your countrymen, no matter if you can't find it to agree all the time nor make amends over every little thing, should be fighting for your rights and liberties just as you should be fighting for them. We shouldn't be a mindless herd following the same lines, but we do need to find the respect and value for one another to make the change that benefits us all. Only when we are unified are we free. Now, to balance this out, when I was looking around for critical analysis of the album online, there wasn't a whole lot I was able to come across, except for a few non-critiques, like Combat being more of a filler track than a song, but that doesn't say much about the message overall. Personally, if I had to throw anything negative at Fight with Tools, it's that the Flobots sometimes come across as idealists first, activists second. Now, idealism and activism go hand in hand, obviously, but sometimes I do get the sense from their interviews and TED Talks that they value the poetic expression of their work and what that has to say, rather than the pragmatic effect of their work. There's a risk when you focus too much on metaphor or lyrical flourishes that the message gets trapped in art and never translates into action. But the Flobots seem aware of this. Fight with Tools is filled with direct calls for engagement, even if their tone remains more classroom than riot. Not to say that they aren't active in their communities, nor about what they say. There was the whole issue in 2017 when Logan Paul took Handlebars, that song about unchecked power and corrosive ego, and turned it into a song about treating women like objects. But expecting Logan Paul to be a decent person is like expecting Half-Life 3. And in the face of this, Johnny 5 came to call out Logan for the misappropriation of their song, roasting him bad enough that No Handlebars was taken down off the internet in 2018.
I know it's all just a joke, but I disavow the whole system's broke. Gotta fix it now. You can't handle bars, so you mangle art. So you split the spokes, now they're sticking out.
The group does seem dedicated to their cause and their words, actions that back up what they say. Apart from that, the only thing I could really hold against them is they aren't as outright violent or aggressive as somebody like Zach De La Rocha, but even the Flobots themselves acknowledge that they're a Rage Against the Machine light.
I feel like justice in the long view is slow, and we've had an example of how things get to change, and we've got to see some things happening, but like we can guarantee that justice will continue inching forward. And as long as we keep pushing, it will keep moving.
And with a vision more about unity and compassion in the face of these systems rather than anarchistic destruction, they come off like an MLK to Rage Against the Machine's Malcolm X idolatries. For as long as America has existed, violence has been at its core. Not just physical violence, but systemic violence, through policy, propaganda, silence, and denial. From stolen lands and broken treaties to bombings overseas and riot gear in the streets, this country has always used force, whether blunt or bureaucratic, to shape its identity. And on the flip side, violence has been used for good. For the revolutionaries that broke free from England, it began a trend of nations breaking free from the colonial occupation. To activists earning their right to vote and eat at the same lunch table, attempting to kill the bigotry and hate of the past. Fight with Tools is a continuation of that legacy, an effective look into the history of revolution and how it's applied today. How can you join the other America and be a part of something that properly fulfills the ideals of a nation that promises peace and freedom for all? It has a lot to say and wants to be an inspiring ballad for those looking to break free from the mold and make the change that we need in the world. And for that, I find it deeply patriotic and incredibly impactful. It's not a call to just stand with your countrymen, but to be a thinker, an activist, to take part in the war for your mind, and be what the promise of America needs of you, a patriot. With that, I want to thank each and every one of you who listened and watched the video. I know it's not really the normal kind of thing I do, and we'll get back to Warhammer comparison nonsense soon. But I just felt like going over one of my favorite musical albums in time for the great American Independence Day. As always, another great big thank you to all my members and patrons who you can join for just $1 a month to get early access to all my videos, some behind the scenes perks, and even ask some questions, which I will answer now. Ruben Villa Esqueza asks, question about future games or topics I might be doing. I can tell you, coming up soon, I'm putting up all of the Bethesda protagonists, the Soul Survivor, Starboard, and Dragonborn, into Warhammer 40k. As far as other projects, I don't think that far ahead. Normally, it's just sort of whatever I'm in the mood for, whenever I sit down to make a video. I can say some stuff like Kirby into Warhammer 40k has been on my mind, but we'll have to see where it goes. He also asks, would I be interested in pitting StarCraft or Mass Effect against the Illuminate from Helldivers? StarCraft I probably won't ever go back to. I used the Zerg in that one video about bugs, but StarCraft just isn't my thing, and I don't like it enough to sit down and learn the lore. Unfortunately. Unless there's like a really big drive for it, but it's one of the rarer comments I see often. And then Mass Effect in Helldivers, maybe, we'll see. I only really did the Reapers in 40k, and that was like a kind of offhand thing in one of the mashup Battle Royale videos. So maybe, possibly. I don't know, I'll have to experiment more with doing different verses against each other, rather than things just versus Warhammer 40k, but the Warhammer one is what tends to do the best, so I always end up leaning into that, rather than, you know, going in any fancy directions with it. But we'll just have to see in the future. I can't really say yes to anything 100%, but I won't say no either. Except for StarCraft. Sorry if you were really into StarCraft, that's just not my thing. Warframe wasn't even my thing, and I barely got through that. With that, thank you very much, and I hope you stand tall, rise up, and join the other America. Stay cool, have fun, and be awesome. Happy 4th of July.